My name's Josh. I am somewhat loosely in charge of this ragtag crew of awesome photographers. Today we have actually Stephen. Why don't you introduce? You're the one who wrangled this one together.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So tonight we got Erik Kuna. If anybody is in the Kelby circles, should hopefully know him. I usually watch him on the grid on Wednesday afternoons while I eat my lunch, and watch Scott kind of shrink in his chair this Wednesday. Yeah, he's an award-winning professional aerospace photojournalist for Supercluster and a photo educator at Kelby 1. That's where I learned how to use photo pills from his class. He has a passion for landscape, aviation, astro, spaceflight photography, and his goal is to create images that help educate, inspire people about the aerospace industry and our wonderful planet, the Milky Way galaxy, and beyond. So without further ado, unless I left something out, we'll hand it over to Erik. And I appreciate you coming on here. And it's kind of, we're getting into Milky Way season. I know you've already been out in Arizona doing
some.
I've
already been out.
So, but I know a bunch of us, like you probably heard Josh talking. Josh teaches here at our local camera shop here, Precision, the astrophotography there. I usually tag along sometimes, except for this weekend, and does other workshops out in West Texas that I'll be going to Memorial Day weekend.
You.
So
well, that yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's exactly as you said. That's what I do, and I'll go through that in just a second here. But the nice part for you guys to know, being in Texas, you don't have the ability to get to dark sky locations is within a little bit more of your reach than most of the country, especially us here on the East Coast, right? So let me go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and present. I'll share my screen, go through a presentation, hopefully. All right, so I'll go ahead and share the screen. You guys should be able to see my Lightroom now, right?
Yep.
All right. So yeah, so I'm a rocket photojournalist. That's what I do as far as photography. Definitely where I make my money, and that's also where a lot of my effort is put into. Later, if you wanted to check it out, that's my website. I'll go over it later. My social. I'm very active on Instagram and Twitter. Like we were talking about, I have a bunch of classes over on Kelby 1. Educational training site where we go over a bunch of different things, everything we'll be talking about today. But this is really what I do. I capture images of space flight, and for a bunch of different agencies. Lately, I've been kind of locked up with one agency that really allows me to be very creative, do different things, and pays me well. So that's how they are able to. I don't do much work for anybody else anymore in that space, but I'm able to even capture, Milky Way in with rocket photography. We do a lot of detail and just telling the story of, how these rockets get to space. And then even further, I've actually gone into now capturing the rocket in the upper atmosphere and able to capture the rocket as it boosts back through the atmosphere. Some of the rocket boosts back. Like, for example, in this shot, you've got the rocket on the top boosting back, and then you've got the second stage and the first stage rocket still continuing on the bottom of the screen up to orbit. And this tech or this type of shot ended up getting me where I won the Aviation Week photo contest last year for this technique that was developed, where we were able to capture this. These phenomenons, and now everybody's doing it. But it was one of those things where when I started out doing this, a lot of people that were at NASA, a lot of the older guys would be making fun of me because I'm when I'm shooting this shot here, the rocket's way up and you can hardly see it with your eye, And most of these guys at NASA are like, you're not capturing anything. They're just laughing at you. But then now they're mimicking me. So it's kind of the funny thing is the full circle. I also love aviation photography. There's an F-35 with all the condensation cloud. Love that. Love to capture aviation with different things juxtaposed, like the moon there, the sun, getting those peak moments of action. That's a big thing in my photography. Then I love Milky Way landscapes, right? Where we're able to incorporate landscapes into our photography. I do a lot of light painting as well. Most of my Milky Way shots like this is a single exposure. I'm big into the single exposure. That is a two exposure twilight blend, single exposure as well. And then I love, again, photo pills is another thing I love. I love to, put the moon in, position it in with other things, let the moon light up my scene. All these different things where we can capture different events. Like here I had, this is Jupiter rising over the Milky Way in Florida. So this is up in the panhandle of Florida. This is where I just was over in Arizona capturing, this is outside the Tonto National Forest over by the Superstition Mountains. This is actually outside Lost Dutchman State Park. I specifically went there because the light pollution from Phoenix comes into the mountain range, but then you're outside of Phoenix and you're shooting towards no light pollution. And that gives you that's one single exposure where the mountain is lit up, but then the Milky Way is also probably exposed in that same photo. But this is one of those things where it's planning, because this shot was taken at a specific time of year. This was the spring. This shot can be had in the spring into the summer, but as you get later on the year, you won't be able to get this shot. So that's why I went out actually very early for most people. I went out in the end of February for that shot. I love doing light painting for single exposures as well. That's a single exposure where I'm just using a light. I'm using a light that's just very dimly lit. It's called low level light painting. Love to do that. I love to also, again, blend stuff together. I like to bring foreground elements into my shot. So this is a Tesla we had that we took up to the Big Bend area of Florida and then lit that up. This is actually two exposures where we lit the car and then balanced in the Milky Way. I love to also, this is another great time of day. This is astronomical twilight. There's a period in which you can still capture the Milky Way and capture the rising sun at the same time, called astronomical twilight. Able to blend different things into a single exposure. And then like this shot where, telling a story of, this is my daughter in front of a beach on Cocoa Beach that we found, that we get down low, we didn't see anything else, and then we planned it to where the rocket streaked right over top. So that was a single exposure with her being lit up with a flash, so it freezes her, and then that's an 8-minute exposure of the rocket. So love to do that. But what I want to talk about today is astrophotography, right? And especially a type of astrophotography that anybody can get into even in their backyard. And that is the concept of deep sky astrophotography. So these are some shots right here. So let me flip over here. And let's go ahead and see this. So, just astrophotography for beginners. Who is this for? And, really at the end of the day, what I'm talking about here is for beginners to intermediate photographers, somebody that's using a DSLR or mirrorless and has a telephoto lens. If you're somebody who does aviation photography, bird photography, sports photography, you're going to have pretty much all the gear you need. And this is usually called deep sky astrophotography. There's a Milky Way landscape, which is a different thing where a lot of people get into. That's a harder one to do consistently, because you need to be in an area where you don't have light pollution. Where this type of astrophotography, you really only need a DSLR mirrorless and something in that 70 to 600 millimeter range. Every shot I'm going to show in this presentation was all taken with a DSLR. There was not a single, like this, no telescopes, no crazy anything. So everyone really can do this. It just, you need a few ingredients to do this. And that's where, I think we try to overcomplicate things as photographers. I know I do. But at the end of the day, you need a camera, a telephoto lens, a steady base, a tripod. You might need a release. If you have a mirrorless nowadays, you probably don't even need a release. And if you have a self timer, you could use that too. You need a backyard or an open field. Again, all these shots I'm going to show here, most of them were taken from my backyard. And you need clear skies. That's going to be one thing that we'll go into later. We were talking about earlier. You need clear skies, and you probably need one piece of gear. And that's the one thing you're going to consider in here is if you want to do this, you're going to need one piece of gear. And you might need two if you're like me and live in a very light polluted area. So, and like I was saying, unlike, that wider field landscapes, you could do this from about anywhere. We just have to deal with that concept of light pollution, right? And what is light pollution? Like that is our natural, light pollution. This is a light pollution map. So this is showing us the areas that are really bright. You guys over here in Texas, you've got, again, if you go west of you guys have very dark skies west of you guys. What I have to do over here where I'm at is I've got to go to the coasts and I've got to get away from light pollution and shoot towards the dark skies. So that's why you see a lot of the shots that I have in Florida are usually water, beach, and something in the foreground because I'm shooting towards the dark skies. There's another thing in light pollution knowing is there's a Bortle class. That's a good way of like just us knowing how dark our skies are. I sit there in that between a 8 and a 7, more towards an 8. So you can see I'm way up there. I'm in that very light polluted. But we can also combat light pollution filters and telephoto shots with filters. And that's one of the things that I do to shoot anytime I want to in my backyard. If there's a clear night, as long as I've got a filter, I can shoot these shots and I can get shots just like this from my backyard, So these are very light polluted areas, and I am taking these shots right from a very, very light polluted area. So you can see that you can capture very dynamic shots right from your backyard. You can capture great stuff right from the moon is a great subject to practice on. Or you can go a little farther and start getting into, things like this was the conjunction between Saturn and Jupiter and Jupiter and Saturn last year. So again, all this with a mirrorless DSLR mirrorless and a telephoto lens, but the one thing you're going to need one piece of gear, right? And that one piece of gear, if we get through, we got a camera with some kind of bulb mode, which pretty much everybody has bulb mode, telephoto lens, a sturdy tripod, something to trigger with it. And then we need this thing called a star tracker. This is like the essential piece of gear for astrophotographers. It's a great piece of gear also for Milky Way astrophotographers. I don't use it as much for my Milky Way astrophotography, I have to be honest, because I like doing it in one exposure. And a lot of times using a star tracker on landscape shots requires 2 exposures, where all the shots you've seen so far, they're either one exposure or multiple exposures stacked on top of each other. No kind of like blending or anything that we're having to do. So what is a star tracker? Because I think people get confused on this topic of like, what is a star tracker? All a star tracker is that it counteracts the rotation of the Earth. And that really is it. And there's no magic to it. And it's seriously that's all it does, is it just moves the camera around very slow to where it would circle the whole rotation in about 24 hours. That's all it does. So it's just at the gear, there's this very slow geared rotation that just rotates the camera. So what we do is we point that at the celestial point, and then it revolves around that. And in the northern hemisphere where we are, that's Polaris. So what happens without a star tracker? Well, that's where you're going to get that. You're going to get shots that they start trailing or blurring. So just, that's what, think of a star tracker as somebody taking a super steady panning shot, keeping something in focus. That's all you're doing, is just taking a super steady panning shot, and it's keeping it in focus, but it's doing it for you. You don't have to do it. So what are we looking for, when we're starting to look for these things? Well, the first thing is nebulas. Nebulas are probably the way to start, because they're the coolest looking, they're the brightest, they're the easiest to shoot. Then we have things like star clusters, planets. Planets can be very hard because that's where you need more reach. Nebulas are huge in the sky. Planets are very small in the sky. The moon is a great subject to start with. Galaxies are another one that are a little bigger in the sky. So again, in order of ease, we're going to have those nebulas, the moon, galaxies, then planets and star clusters will start getting a little harder. But what we want to do is keep it simple. We want to target something at first that's very easy to do. So we're just coming out of the winter season, or what, that season where we would be going after the Orion Nebula. I already showed a couple shots of the Orion Nebula in there. That's a great target because that's easy to use. You could see it with your naked eye if you're in a really dark sky location. And the Lagoon Nebula is another one. That's one that's very distinct in the Milky Way. So, you got the Orion Nebula, right? So the Orion constellation, it's going to be this nebula down there, right? So there's this Orion Nebula down there that's going to be a very easy target for everybody. And that's a single exposure of the Orion Nebula at 400 millimeters, one single 3-minute exposure. Then you got the Lagoon Nebula. So there's the Milky Way, and you always have in your Milky Way shots this kind of area in the Milky Way that kind of looks like it's shaped like a lagoon, and it's kind of pinkish or purplish there, and it's right there, right? And then that's what it'll look like kind of up close at 400 millimeters. So how do we find these targets? Well, that's the great thing nowadays. I used to have to, like know where things were, and, which is great. I think a great thing to do is learn the night sky before you go traveling. Like if you guys in Austin, and like the place to go would be like Big Bend, Big Bend National Park. But if you guys are going to drive all the way to Big Bend National Park, which is still a long drive for you guys, you probably want to know more about the night sky, how the Milky Way is going to go before you go out there, because you can do that right in your backyard and your home and start studying it to know where those targets are. A great app for me, I'm on an Apple device, Sky Guide. They don't have a Android equivalent, but I love that one. Another one's Stellarium on the Android side, that's also universal, and where they have also apps as well for your desktop. So you can get that as well. And what these allow you to do is really find those constellations very easily. They actually have augmented reality, like photo pills, where you can just hold it up and you'll see where it is. So how do we align this, right? So that's the next thing, is we need to find out where Polaris is based on your location. This is actually in photo pills. A lot of people don't know this about photo pills, but when you go into night augmented reality and you see those like rotating circles there, and there's a center point, that center point is where Polaris is. That is useful if you're doing star trails, because then you can, in photo pills, hold up your composition, find out where Polaris is going to spin, and you can see where the stars are going to spin in your shot. The other thing that we have to be concerned about with astrophotography is the moon phases, right? We want not a lot of, in fact, the biggest source of light pollution is the moon. Humans are the second biggest source of light pollution, but the biggest source of light pollution is the moon. So we have to work away from the moon. Now, the great thing about telephoto astrophotography is the moon is less important. I can actually get some of those shots you saw were, in fact, one of them was when the moon was full, like a full moon. And the difference is where I was filtering out that light. I was telling the camera through a filter, I don't want you to let in that light. I want you to only let in a certain wavelength. Like I said, Sky Guide is great because it'll show you it'll show you actual pictures of what nebula you're going after, or what formation you're going after. And it actually shows you like these are actual pictures that the app is taken, like they're not computer generated. So this is what you would actually see if you start zooming in. Then what else I love about it is it's able to show you when the moon, planets are going to rise and fall. It pulls in weather, and it pulls in weather from dark sky, which is usually very accurate. It shows you also where satellite passes are coming, because sometimes that's cool to get in your shot, but that's also sometimes you want to avoid satellite passes because you don't want satellites passing through your image. It also pulls in where, again, the dark sky, you can see that that's my target right there. I'm between Tampa and Clearwater, right in that 7-8 zone. And then the other thing that I love about, apps like this is it'll show you when something's coming up. So you can see, hey, I better not miss the lunar eclipse, or I better not miss the supermoon. It'll remind you of these things. So let's get to like the camera setup, because I think this is another thing that trips up people is like, what do I do? Right. So really, there's my backyard, and there's actually the Orion Nebula, and you can see in the background or the Orion constellation, and my camera is pointed up there. I've got my 100 to 400 lens. I think that's on my Canon 70D, and that's taking a shot. And then you can see there's a star tracker there that's countering the rotation of the Earth, that is pointed at Polaris and then rotating around Polaris. So that's all it is that camera pointed at my target, but then what's happening is that star tracker is pointed at Polaris. And again, there's me. It's the middle of the state in Kissimmee Prairie Preserve. We've got the star trackers pointed at Polaris, and the cameras zoned in. I actually hadn't aimed them yet because we had just got there. So the astro, it really unlocks when you get a star tracker, because at this point we can really kind of make these longer exposures. So, but what's best for a beginner? Because I think this could be very intimidating, because you'll go online and you'll read all about this stuff, and they'll tell you, oh, you need this, and you need a guide scope, and you need a tracker, you need a computer that's hooked up to it. You want one at first that's just lightweight, portable, doesn't require computer inputs. It's kind of self-contained where you can take it with you. And if you're going to go past 200 millimeters, that's where a lot of times you're going to need something like that counterweight. So you can see that counterweight is on the bottom left there, and it's just able to counter the weight of your telephoto lens. There's tons of different star trackers. There's some for ioptron. I actually use the ioptron one. There's also the Skywatcher Star Adventurer. And then you can see on the bottom there's even a small one that I have as well, which I use a lot of times for landscape, is the Move, Shoot, Move rotator, because it's so small, it's very compact, but it still can do all the stuff that I'm showing here. So you can see where on the left image there, that's where that rotation is happening right there in the center. So the rotation is happening. We're balancing the counterweight out to make sure that it's balanced. But then that centerpiece is where there's going to be there's going to be a scope in the middle of that centerpiece. It's actually covered up right now in that picture, but there's a scope in there. We're going to look through that. And then there's just buttons on the back of the tracker. And a lot of times there's too many buttons and there's too many things. Honestly, with this, you're turning it on. You're making sure that the mode is in that 1X mode. And you're making sure the S light isn't on, because that would be the rotation for the southern hemisphere. And that's it. All the other buttons are like, if you want to put it in the different modes, if you want to reset the thing, if you want to step through the thing. Once you set it in star mode and turn it on, it starts rotating. You turn it off, it stops rotating. All the other things, this guide port, you don't need an auto guider until you get really advanced with this stuff. You don't need to trigger your camera through the ioptron. That's not, it's actually works against you a lot of times. And the USB port is just to charge it. Then that's the thing with like a Move, Shoot, Move. That's what it has, one button where it's just basically, are you in the northern and the southern hemisphere, and you're shooting stars, or are you shooting other things? And then it just rotates. But again, you just got to remember that what a star tracker does. It does one thing. It just rotates your camera. And I think that's what trips up a lot of people with it. They think it's just rotating your camera around Polaris. That's all it's doing. So you can see the difference. Here's the difference is, so the one on the left is with no tracker. The amount of seconds that we can expose without a tracker. The one on the right is with a tracker. Same location, same things. The difference is one shot at f2.8 at ISO 6400 for 1 second, because that's all I can expose it for without a star tracker is 1 second, because the stars will start to blur. The difference on the left with the tracker, or on the right with the tracker, I can start bumping up my f-stop to let in less light. I can start lowering my ISO because I'm going to go longer, and then I can set it for a longer period. So you can see there, I've got it to 120 seconds. And then the difference too is the one on the left is taken with a $10,000 lens, and the one on the right is taken with a $1,000 lens. So you can see where it really is the gear. It really is knowing that there's that one piece of gear that's going to change it. That it's really not the one on the right. Again, most people go like, well, yeah, I'd rather the one on the right. And that's the difference, is that as a $1,000 lens with a $400 star tracker versus a $10,000 lens on the left with no star tracker. So what's the secret to a star tracker is that polar alignment, right? But the nice part about this, guys, is there's an app for it, right? So you don't have to like study and know exactly where to align polar. There's like, for example, there's one called Polarscope Align Pro that just basically what it does is it picks up your GPS coordinate. It goes, okay, when you look inside the star tracker and you look inside that little scope, it'll show you where you should put Polaris. So you can see over to the left there, on that night that I was doing it, it said that I should put it between the 7 and 8 mark at that hash. So I knew to move Polaris with these little knobs. So you got the knobs for left, right, up, down, right? And you're just moving the knobs and you're putting Polaris in that spot. So once it's in that spot, using those knobs, and you're just moving it up and down with this. And again, that's where this is just, you're just moving it. There's all these knobs and it looks confusing. And it's like, oh my gosh, what is this? But it's just, you're tilting it back and up. You're tilting it left and right. You're cutting it up and down until Polaris gets in that spot. Once Polaris is in that spot, you're ready to shoot. That's all. This is the secret to it, is making sure that Polaris is in that exact spot through your polar scope and your money. That's the secret. And I think that's where people don't put a lot of effort into that. The next thing that we want to make sure, and this goes for any astrophotography, is focus, right? And we want to focus on the stars, right? So a good trick here is live view. Live view really helps with this. You can see over on the right there, I actually have live view with a little pinpoint light, and you can see as I'm focusing it in and out, you can see how what you want to do is you want to focus it in live view to where that star point becomes the smallest, narrowest, brightest star point that you can. And it's amazing how just little increments will change that a lot, right? Well, what helps with that is there's a thing called a Betanoff mask, which is a mask that you put in front of your lens that will actually show you when that is in perfect alignment. So that's where, again, most of the time you can nail it with live view. You start getting into this and you're going to be like, well, I'll just drop a mask in front of it. You can actually print out these masks online if you go digging and actually make it yourself. You have a 3D printer. It's literally just this pattern that creates these diffraction spikes in your lens. And those diffraction spikes show up like that. And then what you're doing is you're setting it to where those diffraction spikes intersect. So once we've locked the low rotation, we found focus, we could take an exposure, right? So there's your starting point. It's just, you're going in bulb mode. I'd start out for the first time you're doing it at 60 seconds. You can go longer, the better you are with aligning to Polaris. That's why aligning to Polaris is so critical. The closer you are to that alignment of Polaris, you can make this time longer. So 60 seconds, ISO 800, f5.6, and take the shot, right? And then if you're on a mirror, on a DSLR, make sure you're using mirror lockup. So you lock up your mirror, you wait for it to settle, you wait for a tripod to settle, which for me takes between 6 and 8 seconds. I've timed it, 6 to 8 seconds from the mirror locking up. So if you're going to use like your self timer, make sure you're on the 10-second timer, because it's going to take that long once you do mirror lockup for it to settle down. This is a big advantage for mirrorless. Since I've moved over to mirrorless, I don't have to do any of this stuff. The mirror is not there, so you don't have to worry about it. So once you take the exposure, if it's too bright, you're going to adjust that ISO number down, or that f-stop number up, or the exposure time down, right? If it's too dark, you're going to do the opposite. And like milky way photography, we don't want to look at the back of our LCD or viewfinder. It's backlit. It's going to lie to us. We want to look at that histogram. And basically, this is what we want it to look like. We won't want anything clipping on the blacks. We don't want anything clipping on the whites. Now, this is not the same for landscape Milky Way photography. I would have it a little bit more to the left and having some blacks in there, because it's a landscape, right? We want some of those blacks. But for deep sky astrophotography, we don't want any blacks. We don't want any whites. We actually want it to look like the left there. When it comes out of my camera, it looks like the left image there. It's very washed out and gray, but what it is, you're picking up all that detail, you're picking up all that signal from the light that's coming emitted from way far away. And a lot of that haze that you're seeing in that image, that is light pollution that's coming in. But we can, through editing, we can cut through that through different curves and levels adjustments, or even things like dehaze now works great. We just got to be very cautious with how much we use it. But again, the more you get into it, but I just wanted to show that because a lot of times people will look at the image on the left coming out of their camera and be like, oh my gosh, this is not working. That's actually how you want it to look. And that's the histogram for that image. So you can see like, but then again, the image on the right, that's what we're going to edit it to. So if we can't balance that exposure, there might be too much light pollution, and that happens to me a lot. And that's where we're going to need a filter. And that's where we can put these filters in front of our lens or in front of our sensor to filter out light. So one of the best ones to start with, you're getting into this, actually probably the best thing you could buy would be something like a CLS filter. And that stands for City Light Suppression, right? And what that does is it cuts out the lights that humans tend to emit into the atmosphere. So this won't help with like moon, but it will help a little bit with moon, but it won't help as much. This is designed for city light pollution. This is how I shoot in my backyard. Is I've got a city light suppression filter on there, and what it's doing is it's suppressing out the light coming from, you can see over on the right bottom there's going to be a chart, and that's usually what you want to look for in the filters, is see what is it filtering out. And what you want to make sure again is the nebulous light that you're wanting to capture is coming through and it's filtering out. But again, CLS filters are very common. A bunch of different manufacturers make them. There's also screw-in filters that, like, for example, Hyada and others have. Breakthrough Photography has a great one as well. These are great because they do almost the same thing as a CLS, but it isn't as severe. So if you're kind of in that like middle mode, if I was in like a Bortle 6 or Bortle 5 area, I might not need something as heavy as a CLS filter. But again, we don't have to do this at first. I would always tell people, start out by shooting and seeing if your images, you just can't get a good exposure because there's too much light pollution. That's when we need to add a filter, right? All right, so the best time to shoot, we talked clear skies. low light pollution, the moon's not visible, low humidity, and low haze. And you want to make sure that the nebula, the planet, or the galaxy is higher in the sky. As it gets towards the horizon, there's just a lot of atmospheric distortion. So the higher it is in the sky, the better. So this is when we're talking about when to shoot, this is what I would use, right? There's a Clear Sky Charts. It's at website, I believe, is Clear Dark Sky. I'll look that up in a second. I'm not part of it, but if you search in Google Clear Sky Chart, it will come up. This is, on the weather side of it, my secret weapon. I tell everybody about it. This is astrophotography data. This is from astronomers. This is their forecast and their forecast models. It is way better than meteorologists. I don't know why we don't use this to just tell if it's going to be cloudy or sunny or whatever. In fact, I use this for my landscape photography. So if I'm doing landscape photography, I'm wondering if I'm going to have an awesome sunset. It's this app and these forecasts that I use, not weather.com or Weather Street or any of those. It is this that I use because they break it down by things like transparency in the sky, the seeing in the sky, the cloud cover, and then showing us different things like how much smoke is going to be in the sky, the wind direction or the wind that will affect it, the humidity and the temperature. It's got all that data in there. So once you know how to read this, which really honestly, when you look at to read it, we want shades of blue is what we want. For night photography, for clear sky photography, we want darker shades of blue. For landscape photography, I might want just to make sure that it's not just white. When it's a whiteout, just think of it like on the forecast. Like, for example, on this one, I could see that Wednesday at noon, it's just white completely down there. That means it's just going to be overcast and drab, and it's just not going to be good conditions for photography. Now, it would be good conditions in that you'd have an overcast sky. So if you wanted soft light on something that you weren't doing a landscape, that'd be great. But that's where, again, these are great charts for doing that. I do use dark sky. I do like that one. It's pretty accurate. In fact, it was so accurate that Apple ended up buying it because their app sucks so much that they just ended up buying it. And a couple of years ago, they just put dark sky by Apple on the top, and it used to just say dark sky. Which is nice. They kept the website and the app, but then Apple's now pulling in this information. Like I was talking about, the great place to start, the moon. This doesn't require a tracker, but it also can help, because if you're going to get into stacking with the moon or adding stuff like that, there's a mode on star trackers that keep the moon in your frame. So that's a great thing to practice on. Get to know how the star tracker works. It's very easy to do right from your backyard. You don't have to have any filters. And then star clusters, they're similar to nebulas. They're just that same kind of settings. This is actually the Pleiades star cluster. It has this like bluish kind of distinct glow to it. It's kind of cool. And then planets. Now, this is the part where you're going to need to get into like telephoto extenders. You might have to get a spotting scope. You might have to start getting, because to get these shots, you got to be out more in that like 2000 millimeters, 3000 millimeters to get these shots. So it's going to be, this is probably the hardest of them without a telescope. Galaxies, that's another one. You might need more reach. This is one where you might have to just go again with a little bit more of a telephoto or some kind of adapter. But again, with the star tracker, you're able to get the image on the right there, right through a DSLR lens. So again, I just want to start simple and work your way up if you want to get into this. Don't go buying like all these things just to read about online and all this different things. Start simple. In fact, at first, take those shots I was talking about without the tracker. Just take a shot of the Orion Nebula. Just take a shot of the moon. Just take a shot of the Lagoon Nebula and just start working our way up to where you start incorporating that stuff. So if you have any questions, I'm always available over on my social at Erik Kuna. I'm very active in our community over at Kelby One, that's website's kelby1.com. If you want to check it out, I have a bunch of classes over there. I have a bunch of classes on Milky Way post-processing for landscapes. I have a landscape class on Milky Way. I also have classes on how to shoot rocket photography. When I went on NASA, on the base, and show people how to go off base and shoot and on base and shoot, and all that good stuff. If you want to go to my website, it's erikkuna.com. I have links to everything over there as well. I also have links to workshops that we do. I actually only have like one workshop left this year with Room in the Badlands of South Dakota that's coming up here in the summer. And yeah, so that's it. Let me just pop over here real quick. So this is our website. If you go over to kelly1.com, we have courses on pretty much everything. Like we just did a course on the Z9 that just came out, or things about like shooting winter landscapes or headshot photography. Tons of classes. There's like almost 1,000 courses which have hours in them, and so check it out if you want. If you're not into like doing like a membership, we also do conferences as well. We have Kelby One Live is our site for that. We're actually doing a conference next month just talking about gear. So we're just going to talk about, like, a lot of times people struggle with gear. They're just like, what should I buy? What shouldn't I buy? What should I spend my money on? And then we've all paid the taxes. And that's where, again, a lot of times we have photographers who do this for a living, who are coming to teach. And the whole thing is none of this is sponsored. So none of this is like, they're telling you this because the sponsor told them to tell you this. This is why I would tell you, this is why I use this one, or this is why I use that one. And this is all you need, because a lot of times we all pay the tax. I like to call it, in the magician's world, it was the Behringer tax. So we would all buy the Behringer product at first because it was such a good price. And then we'd realize it sucks. And then we'd be like, oh, we got to upgrade. And then it's like, I should have just bought the really good thing that I really wanted. But then sometimes we'll spend our money on stuff that just doesn't help our photography at all. So, and then, if you go to my website, I have links to prints and workshops and training. But yeah, so that's it. That's what I got. And if we got time for questions, if we have questions, I don't mind answering those as well.
Well, thanks. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions? Now's the time.
A couple, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. Your 8-minute exposure with your daughter in it. Did you convince her to stand there for 8 minutes and rear curtain sync the flash?
No. So what I did is I just made sure beforehand that we had the flash settings where it would freeze her for that beginning of it. And then she left. She just left after that. So yeah, because that was not going to work. Yeah.
I haven't had much luck with front curtain sync. So
yeah,
I like rear curtain sync better.
Yeah, the nice part is I know how long my ending exposure was going to be. I knew how long, so like I already know these, like just doing it so much, so we were able to test everything beforehand, which is great. So we were able to have it sequenced up to where we knew exactly what we needed to do. So that was the nice part about it.
Okay, light pollution filters. I thought they were generally targeted to sodium vapor lamps, like street lights. And have you run into issues as they replace them with LED lights at a different frequency?
So those screw-in ones that I was talking about, those have more problems. The like a city light suppression filter that goes in front of your sensor, those do not, because they kind of cover both the LED kind of spectrums and the sodium vapor spectrums. Those older like screw-in, well, I don't want to call them older, but the screw-in kind of like ones that sit in front of your lens, those don't filter out as much. However, nowadays they're getting better. They're starting to, if you get a newer one, they're designed for that. But some of mine, like I've got one that's 10 years old that I agree with you, it's just not as good nowadays because we're moving over to different spectrums.
And actually, if you look at them now, they're actually a little bit more magenta They used to go under names like red intensifier, and they were seriously like only in that red to counteract only that yellow of sodium vapor. But if you actually look at the filter now, they're actually a little more pinkish, purplish because that LED is more green. And so there's a little bit more purple to counteract it. And that's how you kind of know which one is going to work for you with city lights.
Yes. Blue street lights.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of those.
There's one on 130 that is straight up purple. It looks like a disco.
I've seen that one.
It's in Lockhart. You're driving by, you're like, who screwed that bulb in? There's like 8 light ones and then 1 purple.
So that's when the other thing to like when you get into this, like, and I'm starting basic for you. City light suppression filter will handle 99% of all those weird scenarios you're talking about there. However, like for example, I could say I could shoot during a full moon, right? Well, that's a lot of times because I'm going down to what's called that city light suppression filter is a wide band filter. So it lets through a bunch of light in different bands. What I'll do with the moons up is I'm doing what's called narrow band filtering, where I am only going after things like S3 or hydrogen alpha, the oxygen 3, where I'm only going to like a certain wavelength that I'm wanting to let through my camera. Now, if you start getting into that, you're going to do what I did, and you're going to start modifying your camera. And that's the next step. But again, that's why I say you start off slow and you start off easy. And the shots that I showed you today were none of those shots. I made sure that none of those shots are any that you would need any of that fancy stuff for. But when you start, like the shot behind me right here is a compilation of a bunch of different narrow band filters to get that shot. So you're taking different shots and you're narrowly focusing in on, I just want to let through this wavelength of light into my sensor. And then what I've done is modify my sensor to where it does not have any kind of IR filter in front of it. It actually is exposed to the full spectrum of light, but again, that's down the road. Don't do that yet. Like, don't go off the deep end. Start off slow.
I'll go off the deep end.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like that, I dig into something and I go crazy, but I would always encourage people to, I do the same thing. I start off slow, but then I kind of ramp up really quick, like, because I'm like, oh, I could do better, or this would be better, and I'm like, oh, I need this, and
We did Milky Way one night with filters on, and then we were shooting bridal portraits the next day, and we forgot to take our filters off for about the first 30 photos. Yeah, the red that it takes out also takes out skin tones. So it looked like they had like the worst acne ever because it intensified all the freckles and like sun disease. It was great. Yeah, don't do that. Yeah. Are you using like a modified, like I know Canon makes like an RA. I think some of the other manufacturers make like where it's like the H.
Yep, hydrogen alpha.
Yeah.
So the RA is a great camera. I'm sad they discontinued it for people that want to get into this. Yeah, because I've used the RA. I actually love the RA for landscape stuff that we're talking about, like wider field, because it lets that hydrogen alpha light through just a little higher. For the deep sky stuff, if you start really getting into it, you're probably better to go with like a full spectrum conversion. Gotcha. Because that way you can let through anything and everything you want. But again, if you were just doing it for like landscape, I would say don't do a full spectrum conversion, because that actually, you're going to have to filter is the problem. You're always going to be putting filters in front. And with like something like the Canon RA or the Nikon one that has the same astrophotography, you can just shoot with it normally anytime with anything else, and it works. So
that Ioptron, what's the max weight on that?
I think it's 16 pounds. It's pretty beefy. It's pretty heavy. Yeah, it's 15, 16 pounds, somewhere around there. Yeah, I've never maxed it out. But I mean, and anything my gear has got lighter over the years, not heavier. So that's what's nice. Like my new, like the Canon R6 or R5, and then you throw like that 100 to 400 RF on there at 400. Even with a teleconverter, the thing weighs like 4 or 5 pounds. It's nothing, So
I'm thinking more. I know you have like the Tamron, the 150 to 600. Would it hold that?
It does.
With
It
the
does,
R6?
as long as you're not like putting like a 1DX or something
No,
like
with
that
an
in
R
it.
with an R6.
Yeah, an R6 with that would be fine. Yeah. And that's why I say, if you're into aviation, wildlife, and you don't have anything that's like, again, like where your limitation would be is like, yeah, if you had an older kind of flagship Nikon, Canon, or Sony, where it's just that heavy battery grip, all that stuff. And then you had an older lens like that, where it's just a little heavier, you might start getting to that max weight, but it's going to take a lot to get there. And again, you don't really need to. Most of the shots I showed here were 400 millimeters. Sometimes they're on a crop sensor. So the crop sensor actually helps in this equation. That's why the one I have converted is 70D. It's a great one because why I converted that one years ago is it has the flip out screen, and the flip out screen is so nice because it's moving around in different places. And then it's a crop sensor, so I'm getting that 1.6 crop on it as well. And because I'm using a star tracker, I'm not shooting high ISO, so it really the noise doesn't become an issue.
So that side-by-side picture you showed of the Nebula in camera versus edited, where is that Kelby 1 class that shows how to make that edit?
Amen. Where is the class?
Yeah, right. No, we did a class where we did astrophotography for beginners, where we showed how to take an image from one thing to another. We haven't gone beyond that. I think I could probably do something on that. We did, like I said, we did a basic one where we went over how to like do levels and curves and adjust things to bring it down like we would normally do, like at this level. Now that shot, again, when you get down to that shot, like that probably is maybe a little bit more advanced than most people would be at to start out, but that's what you're working up to, but again, that really wasn't anything of a crazy. I mean, it was just my camera and again in a semi-light polluted space with a filter in front of it.
How long would that edit take you roughly?
Not that long. I mean, anymore, probably 10 minutes.
Okay.
10, 15
Just trying to give people an idea of like the back end time.
Yeah, 10, 15. I mean, when you're first starting out, hours, because you just, how it is, you just start messing with stuff. Now, again, if you can see somebody do it, you can start replicating it, it gets a little quicker. But then what happens is it's hard because then how it is, especially, and that's why I say it's hard when you go online and you start getting all these inputs and information. Is somebody tells you how to do it this way and that way, and then you end up you figure out 10 years later that you're doing something wrong for 10 years because somebody told you 10 years ago this is the way to do it. Yeah, so you just got to watch for that stuff. Yep. It really is. I mean, really, when it comes down to it with editing that, you got to think you are just wiping out that haze. So a lot of it is what we call stretching the file. So it is really kind of, stretching down those darks, stretching out those whites, and then removing any kind of that haze or film to the image. So a lot of contrast adjustments is what it is. It's a lot of contrast and tone adjustments.
From my experience, astro has a lot of editing similarities with underwater because an underwater photo is so flat. Yep. And you're really trying to do the same thing of stretch it. Yeah.
That's what it is. It's really, you're taking that histogram and you're stretching the photo.
Yep. Yeah.
And then that actually is, I think, a great thing for anybody. Like you want to make more dynamic photos. It is all about stretching that photo to get it more contrasty and more vibrant and more punchy. The files that come out of our cameras, I mean, Well, I hope I didn't talk about it. You're shooting raw. You're definitely always shooting raw with this stuff. You're never not shooting raw with this stuff. Be it any kind, every photo I showed you, even the ones from my example, there's never, I could disable JPEG on my camera. I'd never use it. But again, when you shoot raw, the problem with shooting raw is you have a raw file. You have an unprocessed flat file that you have to process. That's the choice you make by shooting raw. But when you shoot raw, you have the ability to cook a fine 5-course meal, or you have the ability to go to McDonald's, and that's really what it comes down to. It's the raw ingredients that are there, and it can either be a crappy meal or it can be a great meal. And it's how you cook those raw ingredients that makes your photo great.
Yep. Crappy meal. I'm going to use that when my kids want to go to McDonald's next time.
Yeah, I mean, it'll feed you. It'll do fine, but it's not going to taste good.
Yeah. What's the piece of gear you were excited about and it turned out to be a disaster?
Piece of gear I was excited about and it turned into a disaster.
Or like it just didn't live up. You're like, it's going to do this, and then it didn't, right? I think we've all been.
Yes.
Yeah, a bunch of different things. Probably I'm trying to think of like the most monumental. It usually revolves around lenses that I thought would be like, oh, this is it. It'll be super sharp. Now, I don't do that anymore because what I do is I never buy a lens until I've rented it. So I rent the lens, I test it through the environments that I need. And that's why I have the Canon RF 15 to 35 2.8. And that is my Milky Way lens. That is because I shot with a bunch of different ones and I tried a bunch of different ones, and I always came back to that one's the one I want. That one's the best. That's my focal lengths that I love. It goes from my 15 wide, it goes to my 24, and then it can give me 35 if I want to go in tight. It goes everything I want, and it's super sharp and all those. And I'd rather that than 14 f2. People be like, well, why didn't you get that one? Because it's it's got one more stop of light. And it's like, no, because that lens does everything for that I need and everything I want.
That hurts. I have the 14 f2.
It's okay, but again,
No,
that's where you get down to it, is like,
it's fine.
that lens was perfect for me. So I was like,
yeah,
I mean, that's what it is. Because if I would have bought the other ones, I would have been unhappy. But I rented that one for a trip that I took, and every time I went back to, those are the best. Those are the best. Those are the sharpest. This lens is easy to use, and I love it. But I spent a lot more on that lens than I would if I bought another one. But it's because I love it.
Yeah. Now we rent a ton. It's way to go.
Yes, rental is the way to go. I've done that for all that. I mean, that has saved me more money than anything in at least the last 5 to 7 years.
Yep.
Josh, I'll be bringing the 15 to 35 with me so you can borrow it.
We never even, last time we went, we didn't even trade. You shot that and I shot my Sigma. We never even tested each other's. That's all right. I'm also bringing out the Irix Blackstone 15 2.4.
Yeah, I rented that one too.
Yeah, for some beginners, it has the focus indent at infinity. And so we have some beginners coming out that really haven't done it before. And so I figured that'd be a good one to be able to just lock it right to that focus. Yeah. Do you do any like panorama, like multi-row or anything like that?
I do. But I find that I don't as much. I do a lot more panoramas with my landscape photography than with my Milky Way photography. But part of that is because I think I really love foreground and Milky Way compositions. I'm not as much into like showing like the whole expanse arc of the Milky Way. However, I do that and I like it, but I just love the other stuff.
Cool.
I mean, the big thing with that, if you're going to get into it, is just making sure that if you do have foreground elements in your shot and you're doing a pano with the Milky Way, is just making sure that if there's any foreground elements, that you just aren't creating like a parallax with your images. So a $20 rail will put your lens back at like a no parallax point, and that way you can kind of like you could pan with it without losing a bunch of data, you know, because that's what ends up happening.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Cool.
thank you. Really
Yeah, no
appreciate you
problem.
taking the time.
Hey, where do people go to follow you and all that? Was it at the beginning? Can you
Just-
mention that again one
yeah.
more time?
Yeah, it's ERI. It's always my name, so it's just ERIKKUNA. So
Great.
you go there.
Yeah.
Going to Instagram right now.
Yeah. My son's name is Eric with a K.
There you go. Mine was there was an Olympian, Eric Hayden. It was a
The
Oh,
speed
yeah.
skater?
yes,
Yeah.
speed skater.
Later,
So
a
that was my parents saw that and went, you know what? We'll just do something different. His name was spelled that way. There you go.
later raced the Tour de France.
Yeah, there you
Did
go.
he?
Yeah, he did.
Wow. That's quite the two sport.
Yeah, very opposites.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. Very cool. Anybody else have anything?
Questions? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
I'll figure it out in Del Rio.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bunch of us going out to that. If you look behind Josh,
Mhm.
that's where it's right down there on the border.
Yeah, very cool.
That's Rattlesnake Canyon.
And
Always a good place to shoot when you
Yep.
got rattlesnake in the name.
Yeah.
or yeah, just make sure I'll be bringing the Cactus Be Gone.
Mm. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
I was just out in Arizona. We had a bunch of encounters. Luckily, I stayed away from them, but
So
we
Eric, your
definitely
boy
had some
Steven here,
encounters.
had his backpack, set it down on a jumping cactus patch. Didn't realize it, put it back on his shoulders. And I spent, what, 20 minutes picking them off of you?
Yeah.
He had
Yep.
probably 30 jumping cactus from his elbow to his hips.
Yeah,
And we were just picking them off. Oh my gosh.
I played ping pong with like I was the ball bouncing back and forth between the cactuses. I was not fun.
Yeah. Yeah, they're no fun.
Well,
No, they're not.
we just had one that was pretty interesting. We were out in Arizona where one of the guys we were with, he's our director, so he does all the filming and all that stuff, and we were going up to a location that we were going to go shoot, and one of the things we had to do was kind of just step over this barbed wire fence had been laid down. So it was laid down and you had to kind of just step over it just a little bit, like maybe about 1.5 feet, 2 feet up, like 1.5 feet. And I was with another instructor that we work with, and he got over and he's up there walking away, and I got over. And then as I'm turning around, Jason is stepping over this barbed wire, and he, for some reason, just lost his footing, and instead of, kind of going forward, he went back. But what he didn't realize is behind him was one of these cholla cactuses, and he
Oh, the
went right
Cholla got
in-
him?
Yeah, so went right into that. And then so we spent about, like you said, about 30 minutes. And then as we're wrapping up getting stuff out of him, he turns to both of us and says, all right, we're gonna have to get really friendly now. He's like, I'm gonna have to drop my pants.
Oh,
And you guys are gonna have to pull some out, because he had some right in the rear end. So we got very familiar. So it was a
That's
nice
a good
one.
friend right there.
Yeah. But it turned out it was a great story. It was a great story.
Oh, yeah. Steven was definitely our cactus magnet.
Yeah. But I fixed your car. So
You did. I did blow up my car.
That's a lifetime experience.
Oh, yeah. I'm making sure I bring some baling wire and my multi-tool this time.
Yeah, I'm bringing a different vehicle this time, so we'll be good. We'll be
So,
good.
all right.
All right.
All right.
Cool.
Anything
Eric,
else?
Eric, thanks so much, man. We really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
appreciate it.
Thanks for
Yeah, no problem.
coming and visit us in Pflugerville, Austin. If you ever get out this way, man, holler at us. We'll go buy you a beer or something.
All right.
And some
sounds good.
barbecue.
I'll
And
I'll
some
be out
barbecue.
there. I won't be near you guys totally, but once SpaceX does their orbital launch, we'll be out there for
Are
that.
you going to Chica Bonita?
Yes, Boca
Yeah.
Chica.
Boca Chica.
Yes.
Very cool. Very cool.
So-
Awesome.
All right.
Awesome. Awesome.
That might be worth a short trip.
Yeah, it's only a 5.5 hour drive.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Only
nothing for
halfway
me.
across the state.
Kinda. Closer than Amarillo.
Or El
Yeah.
Paso.
Or El
Yeah.
Paso.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. All right, guys.
All right. Well,
right.
thanks.
See
Thank
everybody.
you much,
Thanks.
Eric.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Eric.
Thanks.
That's
Appreciate it.
great.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Mm.